That's why I get so passionate about teaching it. And listen, I was master's degree. Then I went on and got my honorary doctorate degree, and I got an honorary because somebody wanted to honor all the work I was doing because I started really, really learning this. And so I'm passionate about it because it took me too long. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to learn this stuff. And I began to realize how long and how many people were suffering from it.
Well, you said so much in that. I want to speak specifically to the ego element because it's a massive area of conflict that I think a lot of people pridefully and self-righteously are so prideful and self-righteous that they don't even recognize that it's happening.
Yeah.
I can raise my hand to this. And so that's why it's easy. And I'm sure you see it often. It's easy to recognize now that
Mhm.
you're on the other side of it. And that doesn't also mean that we're not constantly being humbled by the Lord or constantly needing to humble ourselves, because there's elements of things that in growth, we can feel the sense of what conflicts a lot of people. It's
Mhm.
why things like addiction unfold. It's why things like failure, after you see somebody succeed so quickly and do so well, and then it
Right.
ends up all being taken away from them. It's so many examples in the Bible we could talk to just about this, is knowing that we have to always come back to this state of humility. But you
Mhm.
did something that's really important that a lot of people have a hard time doing. It's the number one objection people will hear on any sales call, specifically around coaching, is investing more than you make. We
Mhm.
want to make more, but we're not willing to invest more than we make because it feels hard. But
Yep.
isn't that faith,
You
right?
know what's so interesting? When investing going to college. So when I got
Yes,
my master's degree when I went then was 40,000.
right.
So when I was still paying USC, hello, in student loans, but I wouldn't go pay a coach
So
because
true.
what I was trying to learn, there was no degree in entrepreneurship, not in this way, not in
Yep.
what I was learning to do.
Yep.
And what's so interesting, and my husband and I laugh about this. My husband is a physicist. Okay, just to give you guys perspective, he has a PhD in physics. Okay, so when I was trying to get a PhD in theology, okay, so I wanted to study purpose. And so everywhere I looked, because my expertise is in purpose, no place could I go study purpose. So when a school called to give me an honorary PhD, my husband said, "Look at that." And then at first I was saying no. He's like, "Why? You've been trying to find somewhere to get a PhD in purpose, but there's no place to go. Now somebody wants to give you a PhD and you won't take it because you think people are going to talk about you. But you've been studying purpose on your own for
Come
30 years. So somebody wants to honor all the work you've been doing, and you worried about what people will say." He's like, "Girl, if you don't go get this honorary PhD, right?
on.
Because
You
you've been
better.
spending the money." And
Right.
mind you, I've been in seminary classes. I've been taking
Sure.
classes.
Sure.
And I want you guys to get this. So many of us, me included, my hand is up too, are worried about perception and public opinion. This is me too. I went and got an accelerated MBA as well. And I did that for me because I wanted to learn. I've sat in seminary classes because I wanted to learn, because I knew that God was calling me to study this, because He was calling me to teach this. And so I'm also sharing that because many of you that are listening, you're at this crossroad between whereas God is calling you and where the world would receive you, where people know you to be, where all the perception and your resume and your bio, all of that about you is already done. God doesn't care about any of that. He's not looking for any of that. He's checking your faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to realize that my faith and where God was calling me was bigger than any place anybody would already recognize me to be. And it was hard. Because when God was calling me to this thing that I'm doing now, it was 1993, and there was no such thing as a coach. And people were like, "What are you going to do?" And I was like, "I don't know what this thing is called."
I'm going to start talking, not in a pulpit, not in a, what? You're going to preach in the marketplace? Come on.
I didn't know what this thing was called, but I was like, "I'm going to go do this." And people were like, "Well, you sound crazy." I was like, "Yeah, I feel crazy, but I'm going to go do it."
So good. And there's this element of investment in faith, right? We can either be triggered into fear, which puts us into a place of complacency and stagnancy,
Yeah.
and the enemy hangs out in a place of fear, versus being triggered into faith. Oftentimes, when something scares me, I'm like, let's go. What do you got for me? God's about to teach me something. God's about to break a threshold. God's about to break a glass ceiling. and at the same time being mindful of course, all the other things that you're responsible for. But I know that there are people who are totally willing to go out and buy that Gucci that you alluded to, that wouldn't pay for a coach, but they also value themselves beyond the Gucci, and they ain't done the work that Gucci has done to get to where it is as a brand recognized.
Hello.
And they're valuing themselves, but they're not out valuing anything else. They don't value their gift enough to replenish it.
Yep. And the
And
thing that I've learned is I will always, always bet on me. I
that's
will
good.
always bet on me. And so the biggest lesson I've learned in the 28 years that I've been in this work is that your comfort and your conviction can never coexist.
Mm-hmm.
I've had to live in uncomfortable. Sometimes, and even as being married for 15 years now, you probably get a kick out of this. Sometimes, even being uncomfortable with my husband because he may not get it yet. And I'm like, Lord, you better go talk to him because he don't get it yet. Right.
Totally.
And my husband will come back and go, "You said God on me, huh?" And I'm like, "Yep." He's like, "Okay, because I get it now." Because maybe 5 minutes ago he didn't get it. And I'm like, "Well, I can't. You go talk to God because I can't wait for
You
you to
can
catch
go
up."
sit in the other room for a minute. I'm gonna pray for you.
Right. And he'll look at me like, and then he'll go and say, You said God on me, huh?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He go, "Because I get it now." And we'll both laugh because
Yep.
5 minutes ago he might have been mad at me about it.
Right.
Uh,
And I think that there's an element to that in marriage. And I hear this all the time. I have an opportunity often to sit with the spouse of the person that I coach. And it's interesting. I never hear when I coach men occasionally, I never hear from the wife. But often when I coach women, I have experience with interjection of the husband. It's an objection, a common objection. I talked about another objection earlier on not having enough money. The next one is a spousal objection.
yeah.
And having the opportunity to talk with them is more so about putting them at peace than it is in their lack of belief towards me and
Mm,
my ability, or their lack of belief in their spouse. They just are inside their own head.
mhm,
And that's like, I'm basically dually coaching at that point. I'm like, sure, let's have a mindset conversation, right? Let's have a spirit check real quick. But
mhm.
I find it interesting. How do you, both in these objections we've talked about, whether they don't have the money, we've kind of discussed that. If you want to bankroll your brilliance, but you aren't willing to go to the bank for your brilliance,
Mm.
we can talk. But simultaneous to that is like that spousal objection. I love that you just said, I'll just pray for you. How do you deal with that from a client basis?
So, what's interesting is God never gives you a dream checking your bank account, checking with your spouse. He's not checking any of that. He's checking your faith. So I've had to do things where it's not in my bank account. It's not. And I'm just like, okay, Lord, I'm just going to pull out my credit card and pray to God that it goes through. And I'll tell you, I remember when I hired that coach and I didn't have 30,000. I didn't even have the deposit in my checking account. And I called my husband and said, "I need you to trust me." And I hung the phone up because I knew he would say no. And I was like, he's gonna be so mad at me. And what I should have done, now I was on the other side. Now I should have said, "Lord, I need you to go talk to him first." That's why I said what I said the second time. That time I came home, I knew he was gonna be mad at me. And I just knew on the other side he'd get it. He didn't talk to me for like weeks. But I kept saying, I gotta just put on my big girl panties and look past it. He'll get it on the other side. I kept saying that, even though my heart hurt, my flesh was hurting. I was like, he'll get it on the other side. I kept saying it. Ooh, it hurt though. I'm not gonna lie to y'all. And then one day he started seeing my growth. I went from making 13,000 to over 200,000, by the way, in 6 months. When I made
Come
that
on,
200,000,
Jesus.
my husband didn't believe it. Now, mind you, I told you he's a physicist, so he can count in his head. He saw my bank account, my business bank account. He didn't believe it. So he picked up a calculator. He calculated it once. He still didn't believe it. He calculated it again. He said, this ain't right. He calculated it again. He was like, I was like, I know. Then he said, okay, now I see why you, okay, now I get it.